All right.
We'll get that
I
right.
think we can get started. Looks like everybody's settled in here at the table. So welcome everybody to the April 29th, 2024 meeting of the ACCSP Coordinating Council. My name is Jason McNamee. I'll be chairing the meeting this afternoon. So why don't we get to it, get this meeting going here. So we'll call the meeting to order, and the first thing we will look at is the agenda. I believe we have at least one addition to the agenda, which we will put in other business. So Jeff, do you want to describe that for the group?
Yes, thank you, Jason. Wanted to briefly touch on the potential expansion of MREP data collection in unsampled months and states. And so we would add that as just a brief item under other business that I will cover at that time.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Are there any other additions, deletions, corrections to the agenda that anybody would like to see? Seeing none around the table, if anyone has a modification online, please raise your hand. Anything online? Okay. All right. No one online. With that, why don't we go ahead and approve the agenda as modified? Are there any objections to approving the agenda as modified? Anyone around the table, please raise your hand. Seeing none around the table, anyone online, please raise your hand. No one online, agenda is approved. Great, thanks everybody. Next up is the approval of the proceedings from our last meeting. Are there any edits, additions, deletions to the proceedings from the last meeting of the ACCSP Coordinating Council? Not seeing anybody around the table. Anyone online with any corrections? Okay, no one online either. Are there any objections to approving the proceedings as submitted? Anyone around the table, please raise your hand if you have an objection. No hands at the table. Anyone online? No hands online. All right, we will consider the proceedings approved by consensus as well. Let's take a quick moment here to see if there's any public comment for things that are not on the agenda. I believe there is exactly one person in the room here who I know, and I know is not going to have anything to say. Anyone online wishing to make a public comment? Oh, okay. James Fletcher, please go ahead whenever you're ready.
We have been trying, James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association. We've been trying to manage fish for years, and it comes up that nanoplastics and microplastics are floating at the surface, both in freshwater and saltwater, and that the eggs and the larvae of most of the species we manage are consuming those plastics and starving to death or affected. The best eggs float closest to the surface, thereby getting the most plastics. Nanoplastics, microplastics. It is imperative that ASMFC and the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Council and the Northeast Science Center throw a full-on press to discover the effects of nano and microplastics on the survival of larval fish and see if we can't come up with a better management scheme. I know it's out of the box, but for years, the United National Fishermen's Association has brought forth the pharmaceuticals, pesticides, and man-made chemicals. And if you look at it, the plastics are a man-made chemical. So ASMFC Council, National Marine Fisheries have been on notice for 15 or 20 years. Is there any chance that ASMFC will delegate a group to investigate this? Thank you very much for your time. James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fletcher. Any other hands for public comment? I'm seeing no's, so I think we are set with public comment. So thanks for that, folks, and we can get into the heart of our agenda here. So maybe I'll start off just mentioning, actually, I'll mention that after. So let's start off with our consideration of the funding decision document. And so for that, Julie, I'm going to go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first thing we wanted to do today was just start with the FY24 funding status. This is the list of proposals that this group approved in October. And the reason that we just wanted to put this up there, oh, thank you. The reason we wanted to put this up there is that the economic impact of Rhode Island's fishing industry and the improving catch and effort data collection from recreational towelfish anglers, those were the two projects that the group had decided would split that money. And so we just wanted to let you know that both of those projects got $65,134, and everyone else got the money that was approved in October. So we just wanted to update you on the status of that. Also, to the best of our knowledge, most of the partners have not yet gotten their money. There's some federal things that still need to be worked out for that distribution. Okay, so the next item is the reviewing and approving of the FY25 RFP. So the summary of changes, the general changes, we basically updated the dates in the funding decision document, the RFP, and in the timeline for proposal review. There were no changes to the biological priority matrix, the bycatch priority matrix, the recreational technical committee priorities, the socioeconomic priority data elements, or the ranking criteria document. I do want to note that Kathy Knowlton did point out that American lobster was listed twice in the bycatch prioritization matrix, and that's because there are two fleets. So we did edit that to say Mid-Atlantic lobster, American lobster pots, and also New England American lobster pots, but that's not actually a change. It was just a typo from last time. And then the only actual contextual change was in the funding decision document. In Appendix A, the Potomac River Fisheries Commission electronic reporting project is now entering year 5. So they have a maximum value of $142,344. And those are all of the changes that I have, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, Julie. So a couple of minor edits and changes to the dates is basically all that's changed in the funding decision document. So we're looking for a motion to approve that so we can move that forward. Is there anybody willing to make that motion? John Carmichael. So, sorry, just to get that up on the board there. If you wouldn't mind reading that, John, I can't twist my head that far.
Yeah, certainly, Jason. Move to approve the 2025 ACCSP RFP and funding documents as presented to the coordinating council.
Thank you, John. I see a couple of seconds. I saw Marty first. Thank you, Marty. So we've got a motion. It's been seconded. Any discussion on the motion from anybody on the coordinating council? Any hands online? No hands online. Why don't we see if we can do this easy? So are there any objections to the motion that is up on the board? If so, please raise your hand. Anyone at the table? Anyone online with objections, please raise your hand. No hands online, so we will consider the motion approved by unanimous consent. Thank you all very much. So I think that is the big action item on our agenda. So we're going to go now to our updates on program and committee activities. And just a quick note for me, we've got a couple of folks up here. So we've already heard from Julie. We have Jeff up here as well, and Ed over here on my left. And so they're going to switch it a little bit as they're going through the presentation, so you can hear from the folks, a few more folks at ACCSP switch it up a little bit. So with that, Jeff, I believe you're up first, so I'm going to hand it off to you.
Actually, we have Julie up first on this one.
Thank you. So we're going to start with the spring data load. ACCSP has completed the staging and review of the 2023 data and some of the other updates to historical data. And we have passed that over to the folks at NOAA headquarters, and they are doing their review. They are going to be getting back to us this week. And so we are scheduling our public release of data on May 7th. So look for that announcement. We will put that out on our website and make sure that you all get an email notifying you of that. Some of the highlights for this year is that we do have a new contact in Florida for American eel data. American eel is one of those species that often has data contacts that are not within the standard fisheries offices. In the case of Florida, American eel data all comes from their freshwater division. So we always have to reach out to the freshwater folks to get those data. Additionally, the conversion factor changes in SAFES are going to be reflected in the historical EDR data in the data warehouse for this spring load. And then also Maine did submit updates to their 2022 data as well as their 2023 data. So those will be reflected in this release as well. The next item we wanted to talk about was the accountability workshop that we held earlier this year. It was in February in Charleston. We had a great time in Charleston, as we always do. We brought state and federal partners, and so we wanted to thank everybody for making sure that somebody was there in person from your agency. It was really helpful to have everyone there to discuss things and be in the breakout groups. So we appreciate everybody being able to come. The facilitators we had were Jorge Fraga. We consulted with him and had a contract with him, and then also Jennifer Cudney, who is in HMS and in Miami. She is part of a quality management group, and she came as well and assisted. So the scope of that workshop, the group determined was the most appropriate and optimal data accountability toolkit so that the ACCSP partners have standard and efficient methods of providing data that's complete, accurate, accessible, trusted, and timely to the data warehouse for use for science and management purposes. And just as a reminder, this workshop is part of the charge that came from this group a number of years ago. There was an accountability report where we did a number of surveys, and that small group recommended this workshop. So this workshop is a follow-up to the report that we did previously. The workshop objectives were to identify when and how to appropriately use different accountability tools, identify the best tools to verify the data that were collected with minimal effort and requirements, and also understand the return on investment for the tool, and to standardize the data accountability processes across partners. So the workshop came up with a data accountability tool prioritization. This will be part of a report from this workshop that should be completed and distributed in June of this year. Tier 1, we have data entry validation, both electronic and paper. We also have data audits, and then we have outreach, both proactive and reactive. Tier 1, these were the tools that were determined to be the most easily accessible and the most return on investment for most of the partners. Tier 2 were in the second level of a little bit less accessibility and a little less ease of use, and they're not as used by quite as many partners. And so that's the Fisher trip to dealer report comparison. Obviously, that's only for 2 ticket systems. And then interagency comparisons, and in the for-hire sector, dockside monitoring. So these are used by a number of folks, but they're not used quite as standard across the board. They're usually used in certain fisheries and not all fisheries. Tier 3, these are ones that are used much more rarely, and that's positional data, or such as VMS, onboard observing data, and then also electronic monitoring data. And then Tier 4 was more of a validation And so this was also part of compliance. These are usually things that are less used to validate the data and more used to make sure that people are actually reporting. So they are a little bit more of a compliance tool. This included the pre-trip notifications, negative reports, dockside monitoring, and again, that was not in the for-hire sector because dockside monitoring for that sector was in tier 2, and then also law enforcement. The other workshop that we held was last year in May of 2023, and that was the Safest E-Trips at Entry Validation Project. Again, we had excellent partner participation at that, and so we thank all of you for making sure the folks came to that. We did develop a requirements document out of that workshop, and what we've done so far is we have hired a contractor at the end of last year, and that person is working on developing an interface in the Safest management system so that partners can go in and create their own validations. And that will be for a few of the core fields, but also for all of the attributes that each partner can turn on or off in eTrips. We are going to be finishing that project also in June of 2024. We will probably be reaching out to your staff next week to get feedback on that SMS interface. The next item that we have is SciFish, which was launched in April 1st of 2024. We've been working on this project for about 3 years. It originally started as a collaboration between the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council in North Carolina, who built similar projects and realized that there was an opportunity for moving from a stovepipe approach to a more ACCSP one-place approach, and they put in a proposal for making that happen through, and this group funded that proposal for a number of years. So the approach for developing projects under the SciFish is to focus on data collection for marine or diadromous fisheries along the Atlantic coast. We especially want to focus on projects that fill data gaps or data deficiencies, and we're asking folks to address what identified research needs they are going to be meeting with their project. So it can't just be, hey, we think it would be really great to collect this data. Okay, which stock assessment is asking for those data? That's the kind of thing that we're looking for there. We also want folks to use intentional design and clearly articulate how the collected data is going to be used in either management or assessments. And we're very much encouraging scientist and fisherman collaboration because this is a citizen science project. So the organizing committee that's been working on this for a couple of years includes the folks that are listed on this slide, again from the South Atlantic Council, North Carolina, ACCSP, Georgia DNR, Rhode Island DMF, NOAA, and also Harbor Light Software. So big thank you to all of these folks. They have been meeting every Tuesday morning at 8:30 for the last 3 years. So it's a lot of meetings. I'm actually going to really miss not seeing these folks on 8:30 on Tuesday morning this week because this is our first week without that meeting. And Brandy's smiling, so she's also going to miss it too. So lots of work that was put in to this. And there were actually 2 babies born in the group during this time period. So lots of things happening. The group that is called the SciFish Advisory Panel as part of the policies that this group approved in October. That is the group that's going to be taking over the administration of SciFish. There were a number of applications that the ACCSP leadership approved, and that includes Julia Bird from the South Atlantic Council, myself, Angela Giuliani from Maryland DNR, Fran Karp, who is an advisor from Rhode Island, Kathy Knowlton from Georgia DNR, Dee Lupton, who is the advisor from North Carolina, George Maynard, who works at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, Laura Ormland is at NOAA S&T and works in their citizen science group, Brandy Salmon from North Carolina, and David Sikorsky, who is an advisor from Maryland. So the SciFish annual application timeline, as I said, we did launch this in April, and that was when we accepted our first round of pre-applications. We did get 2 applications at that time. We've also had a number of inquiries from folks who are interested in putting in a pre-application, but didn't do so in April. The next deadline for that is going to be on June 1st, and then we will start taking full applications in August. And this timeline will repeat every year, so it'll just keep cycling. The next thing I wanted to move into was some of the cross-team projects that we've been working on. The first one is the VMS project for the VTA application. This is the vessel tracking application, and so this is related to the trackers that are on the lobster vessels in the Northeast and somewhat in the Mid-Atlantic. We have built an application and worked very closely with the state partners who are using that application. They're able to view tracks and view the trips that have been matched to those vessel pings. We are also working now on putting together a proposal so that we can enhance that software now that it's been in use in Massachusetts for about a year. So Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, and other states are working together to put together that proposal. But so far it's been very successful, and it gets daily use through that application. The next item is the new eTrips map-based feature. This is an item that requires a lot of programming, but is pretty seamless for the user. The users are asked for their latitude and longitude. They're also asked for the statistical area that they harvest in, and then in many cases they're asked for either a sub area or even a local area in certain states. In order to populate all that, they have to choose each one of those. What we're building now is a map feature. So they open the map, they click on the place that they fished, and it will populate the latitude, the longitude, and the area fished for them. And so we want to keep enhancing that, but the idea is to streamline their data entry by allowing them to answer multiple questions just by clicking on the map, because they know where they are on the map, and that one click can help them to answer all of those. From a data quality perspective, they are still able, we populate the field, but the field is still editable. So if they've clicked in an area and then they realize, oh, that's not really what I wanted, obviously, that's not where I am, they can still edit that area if they need to, if it's incorrect. The next project is the internal commission, finance, and administrative tools. This is a project that the software team's been working on, crossing over with the F&A department for requirements and other needs that that group has for meeting managements and contracts and all kinds of things. There's been a lot of great collaboration on that and a lot of good progress made on that application. And then the final item is the new recreational and other reports in the data warehouse. This is something that the recreational team, the software team, and the data team have all been working on. We used an agile approach for this project, and there are more details on what those new recreational reports entail in the recreational updates. So I will let Jeff cover that later on. And that brings us to the end of my section. So if there are any questions.
Thank you, Julie. So opportunity to ask some questions on the items that Julie covered. I see a couple of hands, so I'm going to start with Dan McKiernan first. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Julie, there was an early slide where you depicted the 4 levels of, I guess I would use the term auditing. And there was level 2 talked about agency collaboration. Could you shed some light on that?
Sure. When we talk about interagency comparisons, what we're referring to is if there is a state that might be having, I'm looking at the state dealer report, but I might be looking at a federal VTR. Or I might collaborate with my neighboring state. So perhaps, you know, Massachusetts and New Hampshire had a lot of examples of a fisherman who was maybe landed in one state or was supposed to land in the other state. And the states can really kind of have to work together on the reporting because people tend to not always follow the rules the way they're supposed to. And so that was one of those things where, again, it fell into tier 2 because you do it sometimes, but you don't do it for literally every report.
Go ahead, Dan.
Did anyone bring up the question? Because when I saw interagency comparisons, I was thinking about like law enforcement. So if a Marine Patrol officer were to witness about fishing, that could be cross-checked to the safest system that there should be a report. Did that ever come up?
It did come up, that's in tier 4, but with law enforcement, because again, it's something that some people use, but it isn't used quite as often. And it's more often used from a compliance standpoint more than from a, did this person report the right number of poundages? So we put it in tier 4 for compliance.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
And I have a third question. Under the cross-team projects, you described an initiative for map-based data elements for area fished. Does this also apply to the request that we made for MRIP to be able to identify fishing locations? No.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Richard Cody, go ahead.
Julie, for the second round of SciFish proposals that are due on June 1st, is there a cutoff period or a date for feedback to the applicants?
Our goal is to try to get back to folks within a month. So we'll try to get back to folks by July 1st. And then you could fill in and we would give you feedback on whether we felt a new pre-proposal was necessary or more likely give you the go-ahead for a full application.
Okay, that's the hands in the room. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Julie, especially the SciFish thing was, involved in those conversations when it started, and it's really nice to see it get to this point. 3 years of weekly meetings, wow. So hats off to that crew. We know they're dedicated, but they really were for this, and it's great to see so many of them sticking around for the advisor role. So look forward to lots of great projects coming out of this.
Thank you, John. Okay, any hands online? Okay, no hands online. One last call for folks in the room. Okay, thank you very much, Julie. And we will move on now to Ed Martino's part of the presentation. So Ed, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Jason. Just gonna slide down a minute here. I think I know a lot of folks in this room, but I don't think I've ever presented to you, so I apologize if I'm trying to keep it high level. If it's too far in the technical weeds, I'll just tell me to stop and we can talk about those details later. But I think I did an okay job keeping the topic on point for this group. So I lead the software team at ACCSP, and I'm just kind of walking through some of the projects we completed in the last 15 or 16 months or so. So since the March 2023 information system meeting, that's where I usually present updates like this. That first update there is kind of, it's a common theme. I'm going to talk a lot about APIs, but just to keep it real simple, that's just for those that don't know, it's just mobile connections and data, any way that data comes in through a mobile device or a server process over the web, it's basically hitting an application programmer interface or an API. So that's all I mean, just mobile connections. So we've, SAFIS has seen a real uptick in that kind of submission with dealer reports, trip reports, and now the VMS location data that Julie just mentioned. And so it's kind of important it's behind the scenes, a lot of this work, but it's important to kind of keep that thing tuned up and really working well. It's also important to make sure it addresses partner needs. So it has to meet partner needs, work well, not have bugs or anything. So we're constantly maintaining that. And those two examples there are basically one just feature where we've kind of made it more flexible to update trip reports through this mobile-based submission process. We call it the trips upload and API endpoint, but you can now update any field with the exception of commercial fishing license and vessel, because that would essentially change the trip questions. But you can, partners can update any field through the API now. That further down in the weeds item there, rapid fire duplicate submissions, is just occasionally the mobile devices have these hiccups and just blast us with the same trip. And I mean, sometimes within milliseconds apart. So we kind of put some rate limiting code in place to make sure that we don't see those as unique trips, we see them as duplicates. The next big item there is the partner footer, which is a bit more public facing. That's kind of like an additional screen in mobile or an additional page in eTrips Online to ask questions that are triggered by what we call downstream responses. So you select a certain species down at the catch level or a certain gear at the effort level. You can still ask a trip level question if those downstream responses trigger it. So it's kind of like you could ask Startport still. That whole feature was developed for HMS initially, but we knew it would have kind of a broader application. We expected more partners to start using it, and that's kind of what's happening right now. We expect it to be used for some of the new lobster fishery questions based on the lobster fishery regulations that went in place earlier this month. So the next release of eTrips will start using that footer more than we're currently using it. That next item is the lookup list. It's somewhat simple, but it's a critical part of mobile services that we put out. It's basically a list of allowed or accepted values for allowed or accepted by ACCSP or determined by partners for values like species, gears, fishing areas. It's all the allowed values that need to go out to the mobile devices, and we push it out through that lookup list endpoint. And then that same endpoint has had some more specific use cases where if we realized there was kind of a problem with the way certain features were working, like mobile devices. If a captain's at sea and submits a trip while they're at sea, if the connection's disrupted, safest might get the trip, we process it. But if the disconnection happens before we can send back the confirmation response, the mobile device is kind of left in limbo. So we developed this trip processed list to kind of resolve that issue, where the mobile device at any time can say, did you get that trip and did it process? And that helped resolve that one particular issue. Thanks, Jason. The next items here are kind of, there's that top right one on the list is kind of a general goal to get eTrips Online and eTrips Mobile more consistent with respect to the interface and the user experience. There's some reasons these apps or these platforms are different, but we've been constantly trying to kind of homogenize the appearance for users. I'm not really going to go into details, but one simple example is just we had these things called, state port and state vessel, which were really just parent lists that forced the user to select the state before they could pick a vessel or a port. We didn't collect that information. And so there was really no need to ask the user and take up screen real estate. And we didn't do it on mobile, we were doing it online. So we kind of cleaned up that interface in online. These things are, they seem kind of trivial, but they're important to the users to kind of have a more homogeneous experience. The map tools Julie just mentioned, that's, I don't think I really have anything to add there other than the last eTrips release, we pushed that feature out. So you click a map, we always auto-populated the Latin long. That was the whole point of the map for several years in eTrips, but now we kind of auto-determine the statistical area, and we're kind of already thinking about ways to expand that use to things like sub-areas and 10-minute squares based on that same click. The VMS project, Julie really highlighted a lot of that work. The software team was mostly focused on the API/mobile side of receiving that data and validating it. That's the trip locations endpoint there. And then we worked with the data team. It was a cross-team project to work on the VTA, the vessel tracking application. It's kind of it's an admin portal to let partner admins go in, review the data, plot the trips, and review the compliance of vessels. The next item, again, is a little bit down in the weeds, but it's sort of a modification to overall safe as error processing. And the real goal there was to kind of put what we're calling soft fail errors or warnings. It's like the trip will still be accepted, but we might say you're on an old app version, or you submitted this trip with, reporting under one federal agency, but it should have been a dual permitted trip. So we kind of have a couple one-off cases like that, but with that project that Julie mentioned about the attribute validations with THT Consulting, Karen Cannell being the contractor, we're going to bring in a whole suite of partner managed new validations, and warnings is kind of one of the options partners will have. They could set a new validation as a hard fail or just a warning. And so that, getting that into the core part of SAFES internals was an important lift for us. Next, Jason. This slide really this is something we present at the Information System Committee each year now, that it's kind of a high level view of the priorities for the software team. That at the very top, I guess the main item here was that we completed the species QC redesign. So I should say these are the top three projects there. They're the species QC redesign, the registration tracking, and the EDR redesign. They're kind of longer term, bigger software projects, but I think based on those first few slides, you can see that there's a lot of other projects going on, a lot of work that comes up. Some of it's planned, we expected it to happen. Other things we didn't expect it to happen, but it's a high priority. So we're constantly trying to stay focused on the core projects here, but we're always trying to work and balance with other tasks and keep priorities balanced as new things come up. And that's kind of what that big arrow is on the bottom there. The species QC redesign was all about giving partners control of species, we call them GUMPs, grade unit market price. There's species type fields, giving partners control at the application and the trip type level to kind of set what values we'd accept and how we'd validate those. So that project was wrapped up, and you can go to the next one, Jason. Thanks. We wrapped that up in June, and we started focusing on these other two big projects, the registration tracking and the EDR redesign project. The registration tracking project it's kind of a project that's really about adding this concept of relationships to SAFES. So giving partners the ability to connect what we call entities or participants together. So whether actually they could be individuals or businesses, and it give partners a way to kind of define those relationships that exist between that kind of data. It also improves how we connect multiple participants to a single permit or license. It gives the ability to connect participants to vessels, and improves how we connect permits to vessels. So that's that one project that we're pretty thick in right now, working on that. The EDR redesign, the goal is kind of to centralize the processing of dealer reporting from online API/mobile and file upload. We kind of went through this process with eTrips about 4 years ago. So we're trying to do the same thing with the EDR dealer reporting side of SAFES. And then similar to the eTrips redesign, we're adding switchboard controlled partner attributes. So, the SAFES switchboard is where partners can turn on different questions, turn on what gets validated, and what are the allowed values, and whether the question shows up or not. So that's all part of the EDR redesign. And then that bottom really small bullet I added there was the API enhancements work that is it fits into that topic of, we didn't see this coming necessarily, but it was a high priority. And that's a task that we added in October basically of this year. And I'll provide a bit more of an update on that in a slide or two. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Jason. Okay, I'm here already. The EDR API redesign the goal was basically to modernize a legacy system that had multiple components. It involved a Bluefin data developed PC trip ticket system. The trips it would generate files, and then the files would get passed around to different servers and eventually make it into SAFES. It's very legacy. It was hard to support. And then it became impossible to support. Well, we knew it was going to be impossible to support early this year when the Northeast Center, they had plans to turn off a host that was a critical part of that process flow. So we kind of had an urgent deadline to sort of plug this reporting gap for about 100 dealers. And it had to be done by February/March. We kind of pushed for a little more time, but the important thing is we modernized that data flow, got it done by March. The data is now flowing in through a more modern API-based approach. And the changes to the API included things like taking this really limited use EDR API or dealer reporting endpoint and expanding it to kind of really handle a lot more partner data, initially focused on Garfo and HMS data, to add more robust error processing. The previous version of the EDR API was really, it was pretty forgiving, and it just wasn't going to work for something this big and this importance of a data flow. And to add a report update feature to it, so you can actually now not just submit new dealer reports through the API, but update those reports. So that was a new feature, and it all went well. I mean, it wrapped up April 15th, and the data is flowing through that new process now. It wasn't really the way we kind of saw ourselves starting the EDR redesign, but I still think it was good timing because we needed to kind of get our heads a little more focused on dealer reporting and SAFES. So these last two slides I had are just, I call it just API system scaling. And what we're referring to there is this increased use of these mobile data flows. So data flows coming in for trip reports, dealer reports, locations outside the web online type interface or file upload. This is specifically talking about mostly mobile clients, but also some server processes submitting trip, dealer, and location data to us. And the plot just shows monthly counts, monthly submissions to these endpoints. The gray there is the trip report calls coming to us to send trip data. And the important point is it's slowly increasing. It's kind of noisy, but it really is increasing, largely due to, at least in the last year, due to an increase in submissions from trips originating at Garfo through Fish Online and from Bluefin Data's vessel program. So that data eventually does get to us, even though it starts at those other apps. And there's been an increase. The dealer reporting monthly count there at the very bottom, that blue line, that's starting to tick up pretty quick now as part of that EDR API work. So it's clearly dwarfed by trip reports, but it's changing pretty rapidly right now. And I guess the main point I had here was that overall, the sum total of these submissions to either one of these trip or dealer report endpoints is always under 60 or 70,000 calls per month. So calls to the API per month. And that's really in contrast to what happened to us early this year when the vessel VMS program really started ramping up and all these tracking devices started sending us location data. That orange line, it's plotted on the same plot that the dealer report and trip report lines are on. They're literally just dwarfed by this massive flux of location data that's coming into the new trip location endpoint. It's really shocking how much more data is coming in from, these are small payloads, but they're hitting us really frequently. So it's just a timestamp in Latin long, but we have to process each of these individually from the VMS tracking devices. And basically, we were seeing up to 400, or we are seeing up to 400 calls per minute. So 400 attempts to send this data to us per minute, up to 300,000 calls per day, 3 million calls per month. It's not always hitting us at 400 calls per minute, but across the month, it's 50-fold higher than what we saw in the combined dealer and trip reporting through the APIs. So it's all good news, but there was a growing pain. It put a strain on the SAFES connections, SAFES database, and we had to really get things tuned up. There were failed connections. It just really ran us over briefly, but we kind of got it resolved. And one more, sorry, Jason. Thanks. Yep, perfect. We got it tuned up pretty quick, and within a couple weeks it was a little stressful, but within a couple of weeks we got basically the database of SAFES and the AWS, the cloud part of that data flow to us. We got things tuned up, and the failures, the processing times went down. The failures are basically non-existent, and so that was basically good news that we were able to work through that in a couple of weeks. It's still something we've got in mind because that was kind of short-term fixes, but there's other long-term solutions we have in mind, like splitting this VMS processing away from other type safest processing, away from the dealer and trip reporting. We can isolate that better. These are things we're talking about. We haven't done it yet. And then I put a bullet there at the bottom just because we did really well on an Inflation Reduction Act proposal that Jeff or Julie might mention, but that's all I've got, Jeff or Julie. If you're, unless you weren't planning to talk about that, I could. Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Ed. Good stuff. Any questions for Ed before we move on? Renee, go ahead.
Thanks, Ed, for the presentation. This is software related. So back in the eons ago when original eTrips was designed, there was intention then, and I know why it's dropped along the way and completely understand, of having dealer reports for individuals who acted as their own dealer essentially and had a dealer permit within the system to be able to enter those through eTrips so they didn't have to go in and then enter some of that duplicate information in EDR. Has that been discussed at all? And I know that there's, you know, from a programming standpoint, I understand it. It's just a curiosity question.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it, Renee, but I didn't mention it enough in that second slide. Jeff's got a point, but I'll let you jump in because I think what I'm saying is okay. It's just that I didn't mention that we're soliciting input for the overall EDR redesign, and next month we'll kind of reach out to partners and say, you know, what do you guys need as part of the broader redesign? I think Jeff might have something specific to that question.
Again, just to follow up on that, we are moving the E1 ticket application into eTrips. And so that is, we're working with Georgia on operationalizing that right now. And that is something that we can use for other states as well, so that it's very common with the shellfish dealers or shellfish. They're their own dealer, and they would be able, we're going to be able to leverage that in eTrips as well. So they can essentially generate both the fisherman trip and the dealer report at the same time in one application. So that'll probably be coming in the next year or so.
Follow up, Renee?
Yeah, so Julie, would we have to roll out a separate application then for those? We do have a decent subset of individuals who do that. It's all small scale, but it just turns into a big burden on a small scale, essentially. So
no, we're doing it. It's all one platform. They would just have different permissions. So we would need to know who those individuals are, and you would be able to set that up, and then they would have different questions because they'll have to answer the dealer report portion as well.
thank you very much.
Yep. So we've got a hand online, David McCarron. David, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thanks. This is David McCarron at the New England Council. Did I catch that right? 2.5 million hits on the API per month?
Yeah, actually higher than that, but just from to the trip location endpoint. So it doesn't even include the dealer and trip reporting itself, just the locations coming in. They're hitting us that many times in peak months.
We can connect offline, but I'm curious if you've looked at the quality of those connections and if those are maybe bot generated. We've had to install Amazon AWS is, depending on what service you're using, we had to install CloudFront to keep bots from hitting our website, which is basically a geographic limiting tool for API requests. Reach out to me offline if you want, and I'll give you our experience.
And I did say 2.5 or 3 million per month, right? Not per day.
Oh yeah, but even per month, that's extraordinarily high.
Yeah, we can definitely talk offline, but I think the math works out with when you scale up vessels sending us that data every month. But
okay.
Every minute, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be curious if you want to compare numbers at some point.
Definitely. Thanks for the comment.
Follow up, Julie?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that for those that aren't familiar with the program, the lobster vessels that have these trackers have a 1-minute ping rate. So when you're looking at I think 6,000 vessels eventually. When they're out on the water, they do have to send a ping every minute. So Ed's right, it is a lot of pings, and in any other situation, it would be a red flag. But in this case, it's mathematically correct.
Great. Maybe still worth a chat though offline, just in case you see something abnormal start to happen, you'll be prepared.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good comment. Yeah.
Great. Any other hands online? No. Jeff, did you have something, or are you ready to go?
Relevant for this.
Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ed and Julie. A lot of these, just for the coordinating council, a lot of the things that they've been presenting on are action plan items that take a fair amount of time to implement, including the 3-year software development plan. And I think what's highlighted in this is there's many hidden dependencies at a very detailed software level of what is the user interface, what are the data quality checks that are occurring, and how do we plan to implement those over time. And so you're seeing a little bit more about what's gone into that and the levels of success that we were able to do at this point. Madeline, can you go back one slide, please? I did want to highlight, Ed pointed out under the IRA proposal here, this is an area we recognized earlier in the year that we needed more scalable, redundant cloud interface. So ACCSP submitted a proposal to the FIS data modernization request for proposals, was using IRA funds. That was a $5 million pool that was highly competitive. I think the proposals that came through asked for maybe 4 times the available funding. And the ACCSP proposal ranked in the top 5 in selection for funding. And therefore, we've got about $350,000 of additional direct funding to do this work over the next 2 years. And I point that out because that's something that doesn't need to go in the next RFP for the admin grant to make the ACCSP systems more modern, scalable, robust to handle these types of projects in the long run. So thanks, Ed, for the update. Thanks to Julie and Ed for your work on the proposal, and the whole FIS crowd who reviewed many, many proposals and were able to evaluate and participate in that. So thank you for that so far. And with that, I'm going to move forward to the recreational section. Alex Johnson would have preferred to do this, but he's out on sick leave today. And so I wanted to highlight a couple, kind of 3 areas. Number one, there's been work on a discards pilot project in terms of developing it. Doing better at identifying discards is priority number 2 in the Atlantic implementation plan for recreational data. Highlighting a couple things about the way APIS MRIP survey at the dock occurs right now. We ask anglers those questions about what is your discard after your trip when they may not have been paying attention. In combination with the fact that there are tighter catch regulations, there's higher effort, that kind of looks at a higher proportion of overall release catch, and therefore the public appropriately questions, what are these estimates of released fish? Are these as good as they could be? And so in addition to that, the released catch length data, so how big were the fish that were released, is kind of a gap in coverage for private modes that goes into stock assessment. So that's the rationale for this discards group to get going. Next slide. And so what has happened? Well, we had this idea over a year ago. A SID committee was formed and they met monthly since January 2023 and finally presented an updated design to the Recreational Technical Committee in March. So MRIP was highly involved in this proposal development. The Rec Tech Committee was guiding it, but it really was kind of a, how would this work? And the goals were really to analyze the potential of digit bias and recall bias in the current methodology and to collect additional lengths of these released fish. Next slide. So the design, very broadly, during an assignment, it bases the increased, or the pilot project on the MRIP primary design. So this is what's the potential to improve MRIP as a core design instead of replace or segment or supplement it through an extra design. So these are extra assignments that can be done in parallel. And the idea is to hand out some catch cards before an angler leaves on their trip and ask them to fill that out while they're out there. The draw and the way the methodology still prioritizes interviewing anglers when they come back. But one of the tweaks is allowing for about an hour buffer time before an assignment to hand out these catch cards. So testing a lot of different little assumptions in that. And then because this slide is about during an assignment, if I as an angler have been given a catch card when I leave for my fishing trip and I happen to return when there's an APIS interviewer there, I'll just hand them the card. Great way to hand it back in. Later on, I'll show you the card, and then if the interviewer doesn't happen to be there, it can be mailed in later. But that's the basic structure of how it's going to happen. The catch cards themselves, so the group spent a lot of time designing these. They want to get tallies for all species, the lengths on 14 managed species. So the box on the lower right says, these are the priority species where we really need more data. Get the lengths on these fish to guide the anglers on how to do it. The card has a unique identifier to tie it back to that particular site and interviewer and state and timeline in the post-processing. And it has a little QR code on there, not for submitting the data, but another way to get a little bit longer instructions. Next slide. So what happens after the assignment? Well, if an interviewer is not there, you can put that card right in the mail, posted prepaid, go back to the state, and the state staff who are already involved in the state conduct of MRIP surveys would be able to enter that data into a new page on the ACCSP assignment tracking application. So that's something that we developed. We have it in-house. State staff would be able to use their time to enter the information in there. And then ACCSP and state staff would QA that particular part of the data. The interviewer would use the same tablet application that they're using, just flag it as a pilot assignment, to collect the interview data and submit that to the central ACCSP database. And so these alignments with current methodology really in green highlight the potential for these overdrawn assignments. So if the work is funded, if the work happens in 2025, it's done in its own little side area. But if all the math works out, if it goes as well as we hope, then those extra assignments can be part of and recalculated as part of the primary MRIP estimates, and that increases sample size, and that might be a good thing across the board. So who's interested in this? The group spent a lot of time developing it. When would it happen? They're looking at data collection in waves 3 through 5. Best case, that would be 2025. In terms of state interest, the individual states by region are listed on screen with a number of assignments that would be added for this. The table shows anywhere between 4 and 14% increase in that state's number of total assignments being done for a calendar year. So it's a significant size of a pilot, and the regions would be kind of combined to get an adequate sample size. But what I really take out of this is the ownership of the group and the process that they got to develop this meant that there's 7 states that are interested in participating in this pilot study. That's huge. And I'm not sure that would have been possible before 2016 when we started doing state conduct, and we've had these kind of learning curves and benefits of having your state staff out in the field doing this. So very excited about the design, the creation of this project, and their plan is, of course, to submit this to ACCSP as a proposal to the recently approved RFP. So one more slide on this one. Next up is, of course, make a few changes to the proposal and submit it. Because discards are such a big issue, I want to note that the Gulf Commission is also hosting a workshop on release catch methodology sometime this summer. So we've been in contact with Greg Bray as the two ACCSP and Gulffin talk pretty commonly, and we'll pass on that information to all of you when it exists. Greg's told me that the steering committee is developing kind of the framework of that particular workshop, but they're planning for pretty open participation to state partners, both in person and remotely. And so as long as the timeline works out, we'd like to have more folks be able to participate in that. Next slide is what Julie had alluded to a bit earlier on the ACCSP data warehouse and website updates. So this is a cross-team project to update how the ACCSP web public and login data warehouses presented the MRIP estimates. So aligning with MRIP fields such as fishing year, annual versus cumulative summarization, adding in confidence intervals, and flagging different color codes for the different levels of PSE or precision. One great thing about this is the coordination internally with MRIP flagged just before we were ready to release this at the end of December. We were able to work directly with MRIP and get the redirection that the wave-based estimates were going to be able to stay publicly available. And so we put that back in, and that's been available since January for anyone looking through the ACCSP recreational query interface. So that has been a big desire by a lot of state and federal partners to support stock assessments and see that level of detail. So thanks to MRIP and thanks to the ACCSP team that we're able to make this work. Also, there have been updates that Julie and Marissa have done on the ACCSP website to add in some more information about how recreational data and projects are handled within ACCSP, and more information about MRIP. And a lot of that was the MRIP page, at least, was modeled after work that was done by the Mid-Atlantic Council, I believe last year. So thanks for that. The third topic in this section is an update on the for-hire logbook methodology technical review. So a lot of dates on this slide. I won't read through them all, but basically it's a bit of a long-term project about how to use logbooks more fully. If we move on to the next slide. Right now, logbooks are used through GARFO's vessel trip reporting as effort in the MRIP catch statistics, and there's a desire to use those more fully for catch estimates. So we want to maintain compatible designs. If there's a move to use logbooks and still keep the FHTS survey design in place, the goal of allowing for that phasing in to work and still keep the survey methodology there and have the outcoming data be compatible both for two boats in the same marina and also for states that do use these methodologies a little bit different than our neighbors. And so we're really trying to develop the design prior to regulations and implementation and obtain feedback on these components from the MRIP statistical consultants for eventual certification. So that review was put in. We met with the consultants last summer. They got a report to us in October, and now we've been working with MRIP and our RAC Tech committee a bit more about where that goes. Quick reminder on where does the certification process lie. There's an MRIP slide. Thank you, Richard, for sharing this long ago. And then the highlighted box in the middle is kind of where we're at. So when it comes to certifying a new design, it's an iterative and kind of long-term process. And all I'm really highlighting here is that the top three boxes of the initial stages are where we still are. And we expect a bit more of this technical review, adjustments on our end, submit back in to see how that design works. So last summer, next slide, please. We had a consultant's external review, and there were 6 terms of reference. I'll kind of pause and let you read some of them here, but we'll share the presentation afterwards. I think you've seen these before. But it's really about survey design components, estimation methodologies, measuring for potential bias, undercoverage, non-response or response errors. Next slide has 3 more terms of reference about sensitivity of the accuracy to the survey assumptions, to other potential sources of non-sampling error, and to potential error in implementation. And so those are areas that the consultants were able to review on. Next slide, please. The green check marks here are really areas where there was alignment in the submitted design and what the consultants were able to review and give us feedback on. So the design as written includes probability sampling. It uses APIS for both estimation and validation. It appropriately weights the sample data and the variances. These are big things in the overall design. And we were glad to see these things come back. There were no new accuracy concerns. But at the moment, there was limited ability to measure and evaluate some of the bias in non-sampling error. And again, confirmed that many of these components were the same or similar to other certified MRIP designs. So these are things that were intentional as ACCSP and RecTech were developing this. And it was nice to hear that confirmation come back from the consultants. What are the areas of work? Well, one point was did not fish reports. There were several questions by the consultants, and RecTech came back and said, yep, we still want to include did not fish reports as a required element of this particular program. The intention there is to have a clear data point of the fisherman saying, I did go out or I didn't go out, instead of the assumption of no report inherently means maybe they didn't fish or maybe they didn't report. So the did not fish reports are a compliance tool that they wanted to include. In terms of declaration or hail outs, for the Atlantic Coast design, the RecTech committee in general said, don't require that extra burden, but include that as an optional step where if a partner agency wants to implement that in their program, it could be fed into the evaluation as a compliance tool. Again, the hail outs don't exactly help the estimation math, but they are helpful in the compliance and the monitoring tools. One point that consultants raised was about vessel frames. So if Jeff's boat has a permit that does not require logbooks right now, I'd be in this, that boat would be in the effort survey frame. If Jeff's boat has a permit requiring an electronic logbook that happens to meet all these design criteria, then I could be in the logbook frame. And so there were some questions about how often a vessel could switch between frames, how that works with the survey. We're working to clarify some of those things about a vessel within a year moving between what type of data collection would apply to it. And then finally was how well to use APIS as a required estimation component. There was an idea to use existing data from 2019 to 2023 to evaluate the tablet application from APIS, the GARFO mandatory VTRs, and look at how well did those things align, what were the overall rates of reporting, and how could we test some of the assumptions on non-response or other estimation biases by using existing data. So that's a project we need to kind of scope out and decide on how to approach, but that was something suggested by the contractors that we wanted to continue on with. So with that, that's a bit of a quick fly through of some of the recreational side items. And the next slide is a pause for questions in the recreational area.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Any questions for any of the items that Jeff covered? John, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jeff. Just curious on the discard study you're going to do. Are you planning to offer any incentives to recreational fishermen to fill out those cards? I mean, it seems like you're asking them to take on an extra burden while they're out there.
Good question. And at the moment, they have not scoped in additional incentives to do that. It would be as people are heading out on their trip to hand them out a card that keeps it within the stratified random design of APIS. But if that's something that the RecTech and the subcommittee could look at in the coming weeks before they submit a proposal, we can certainly ask them to clarify that a little bit more.
Good, John. Okay, John Carmichael.
Yeah, thanks. So Jeff, on the for-hire methodology, so where does this fit in with all the various for-hire reporting and estimation processes? Is this setting some criteria that programs should try to strive to, or is it going to propose maybe some programs change to comply with this, or what? Can you fill me in a little bit on sort of what the end game is?
Thanks, John. I jumped right in without reviewing that part. So good question. The intent is to come up with a certified design that could be adopted by any of the current logbook programs that exist. So it could be GARFO, it could be CFIRE, it could be South Carolina, it could be a state that doesn't do logbooks now but wants to. New York has made some moves in this similar direction to do this as well. So the intent is to set a common standard, one certification methodology, and then have partners, as they choose to, meet that guideline, and that way their fishermen that have those logbooks would be able to have that used for the estimation. It gets more data in faster.
And so it seems like then perhaps the benefit to say somebody with a data collection program to doing this and following those standards is you don't have to go through your own separate MRIP certification processes. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. The intent here is to design it as a group, certify it once, and have it get adopted for implementation as partner agencies, be them state or federal, are able to implement it on their own timeline.
Good, John. Great.
The hand online after Brandy.
Okay, Brandy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've already talked to Jeff a little bit about this before the meeting, but for the discard pilot project, North Carolina is going to try to participate, but we're a little skeptical because we, as I mentioned in, I think, one of our prior meetings, North Carolina had some legislation come down back in October that is requiring all recreational anglers to report 5 specific species of their harvest to the Division of Marine Fisheries when they are done with their fishing. And of course, it's 5 of the main species that are caught in North Carolina. So we're not only going to have people trying to participate in APIS, but they're also going to have to be required to report their catch for certain species and have this catch card process. And so there's going to be probably a lot of pushback on the recreational side in North Carolina, and we may even have a little bit of an adverse reaction to requiring a lot of these different ways of trying to collect data, and a lot of people may assume that this is duplicative collection of data as well. So we're going to have to really make sure that we're working hard on any kind of messaging or outreach on these types of projects so that we can make sure that people understand like what is going on.
Response, Jeff?
I think the outreach is a big component of any of it. Certainly understand the challenges that you have in North Carolina with a couple of these concurrent pilots. So thank you.
Great, thank you. One more look around the room here before I go. There's a public comment online. So Dan McKiernan, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Jeff, to dust off a previous question that I asked of Julie, is there any progress being made on the request that my agency put together last year to have the MRIP, interviewers have that tablet fishing location option to add to improve the fishing location? This is especially important for Massachusetts because we sit at the intersection of different stocks, that keep getting redefined. So is there any forward action on that?
Thank you. There's discussion about it in terms of how to collect more detailed areas. But again, trying to figure that out across all states with the right codes. There've been more challenges than solutions identified to date, but it hasn't fallen off the radar. So it's a work in progress, but unfortunately, it's not going to be quick.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other hands around the table here, Mr. Fletcher, you can go ahead with your question.
Is there any possibility that either the federal under the council system or ASMFC under their system could require cell phone reporting by the individual angler? United National Fishermen has pushed for this for the last 15 years. But why? Can you explain why we do not have individual cell phone reporting when Bluefin Data has a app or system that will work? What is the reason that we have not gone to individual cell phone reporting on all recreational data? Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. It's a good question that has not gone unrecognized. There is an app by Bluefin Data. There are apps through Safest. There are other apps that exist to collect individual angler fishing reports. However, the biggest challenge is about expansion of those reports. And how does the whole fishing industry get represented instead of those that choose to use those apps in that moment? And so when we talk about compliance with overall reporting, we talk about statistical design and being able to expand those reports out across effort to every fisherman that is out there. Those are the challenges that exist. And so at the moment, the survey design and the statistical selection of who reports is really driving a lot of the factors about how these data collection occur. One of the nice things that we presented about earlier about SciFish or any of the citizen science applications is that can be supplemental information about what is caught where, and that can be used on an individual basis and who selects to report that type of information. That can be used in addition to the MREP catch estimates and release estimates that can go into, and the citizen science information typically goes into the stock assessment and management process after or in parallel with the MREP information. And I would pause and invite Richard Cody from NOAA and MREP to speak for us as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Richard, if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make excuses as to why, we're not adopting a full comprehensive logbook program for recreational anglers, but there are some, major challenges to doing that. And one is that, if it's a logbook, it's complete reporting that's needed, all trips. So that would be a challenge, I think, in terms of just the response burden on anglers, as well as just the logistics of managing data of that volume. That said, though, there was a workshop fairly recently in Miami that looked at citizen science-based approaches. So taking app-based reporting and pulling data, whether it's passive data collection in terms of geolocations from cell phone use or just reporting citizen science-based reports. And I think there's a recognition among people, us involved in the data collection end of things, that we need to get a handle on ancillary or auxiliary sources of data to better inform the data we already have, but also just because it's coming to a point now where there are so many other sources of data available that it's very difficult to just ignore them. So I do, I do support the idea of getting, a more comprehensive reporting from anglers, but whether that's for all anglers and all trips, or it's a panel of anglers that can be used to inform, say, discards or something else, those are things that are being looked at.
Great, thank you. We have another online hand, Julie Evans. So Julie, whenever you're ready, please feel free to unmute. We're not.
Great. Well, I wasn't unmuted, sir, so now I am. Thank you for taking my question. My name is Julie Evans. I am the secretary of the East Hampton Town Fisheries Advisory Committee. And my question is regarding any preliminary data as to the response of the recreational groups or individuals that you might have gotten to this point, and how they feel about this new initiative to gain more information. And then I have a follow-up if that's okay.
Jeff, you want to take that one?
Could you clarify which part, the discards or the for hire or something?
For any of them, any of them. Any information you might have gotten, is it too much to talk about?
It's not too much to talk about. They're all in the planning stages, so there's no feedback from the fishermen at this point. That can be.
I kind of cut out there.
Sorry.
Hello?
There's no feedback from the fishermen at this point. We're still in the planning and design stages of what would be appropriate or possible from the science standpoint.
Well, you had mentioned that New York is interested in instituting a logbook system that you had gone into, and nobody's commented on that at all, I'm assuming.
Working with representatives of New York, DEC, they're looking at regulations about for hire logbook reporting. They have logbook reporting in place at the moment, and it would be just some changes to go from paper to electronic and a couple other aspects of their program.
Could you go into those other aspects, please?
I probably wouldn't cover it as well, and Marty Gary, putting you on the spot, can you help answer that or not at this point?
I'd have to phone a friend. So,
I tried that.
So Julie, if you can hear me, I'd be happy to follow up with staff and give you a call, maybe later today or tomorrow.
I would so like to talk to you, Mr. Gary. Well, thanks for that information. I look forward to learning more about this, and so would the members of the Fisheries Advisory Committee. I'm hoping that it doesn't become too burdensome for people, especially for the for hire industry, which really should be carved out of the recreational fishery, I believe, and so do many in the for hire industry here in East Hampton, especially Montauk. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, we've got another section to get through here. So Jeff, whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our last section of updates is on regional data coordination. There are 4 areas that we're going to be going through: MREP, HMS, GARFO, and Southeast Commercial. Next slide. So for just an update on regional coordination relative to MREP in 2024, we continue with you as the state partners to perform the Access Point Angler Intercept Survey and the For Hire Telephone Survey. This year, ACCSP staff, Alex and Trevor and Gabe on our staff were able to complete 2 regional trainings. They think they had over 100 people in total and attend those trainings. And of course, the data collection has started on its regular schedule. Wave 1 in North Carolina and Wave 2 for nearly everybody else. Wave 3, the data collection starts up in New Hampshire and Maine. We're also developing the next cooperative agreement statement of work that includes the Access Point Angler Intercept Survey, the For Hire Telephone Survey. There's also a few components of the Large Pelagic Survey that are funded and accomplished through this agreement, as well as catch card census programs in Maryland and North Carolina. However, those are likely to be changing in 2025. There's been a lot of coordination work going on between those 2 states, HMS, the MREP Large Pelagic Group, and ACCSP about how those programs will be accomplished in years 2025 forward. There's a bit more alignment with the standard aspects that HMS has been running, as well as meeting a couple of the state-specific partner needs and how they will be accomplishing that. So don't have all the answers there at the moment, but it is something that is certainly on the radar, and we're adjusting our statement of work to accommodate. I've already presented on the discards proposal and the for hire logbook design, but overall we continue to have monthly or bi-monthly MREP communications meetings, what's going on with ASMFC, ACCSP, all of the regional groups. They have kind of a northern and a southern contingent that goes through those meetings that we, Tina, Julie, Alex and myself sit in on. Stepping to the next slide of regional coordination with HMS. HMS has been a strong partner of ACCSP for many, many years. They've had continued e-dealer support and integration within safest electronic dealer reporting that continues and has been improving, including with the projects that Ed was pointing out in software about how data flow gets in, as well as how additional questions can be asked and standardized and modernized. With HMS, there's been a for-hire logbook fields that have been added to the eVTR submissions, both in Safe as E-Trips and even in the API. So if an angler is using an app other than Safe as E-Trips, but flowing through the API, so it's a different on-water application, but same database submission, same data flows, then those HMS questions are available to be added in through there. Another project approved by the Coordinating Council last October was for South Carolina and HMS to adopt and adjust some of those data fields into another application, and that project is about to get started as well. The last bullet here is really about private angler reporting systems. There's been moving to electronic for those systems within HMS and for the MREP for-hire survey. And they're kind of considered modernization of those paper catch card reporting to electronic options, either within HMS or within a state system that we continue to work on and develop. And the last two, I'm going to hand over to Julie because she's done more work on these. And so, Julie, can you handle the last, the GARFO and Southeast?
Sure, thanks, Jeff. So coordination with GARFO, Ed already mentioned the EDR API enhancements. This took a lot of coordination with GARFO because they had been manually processing a lot of these data. As Ed said, they were coming in as files and then they would manually process them. And so we needed to incorporate a lot of that into our API, as well as a bunch of the other updates that Ed mentioned. The next one is the GARFO dealer database update. As ACCSP is working on our dealer reporting redesign in the next year, GARFO is also working on dealer database updates on their end as well. So we've been participating in weekly meetings with them to talk about their database data elements and what the updates they're going to be making to their system. So a lot of coordination happening at that level with GARFO and the Northeast Fisheries Science Center staff. And then finally, for the mandatory lobster only reporting that went into effect on April 1st, we had to make changes to our API and application processing. As many of you know, there was an exception for lobster only that was sort of written in everywhere. And so we had to go in to make sure that those folks were recognized as now having GARFO mandatory reporting, as well as adding additional lobster fields with that. So we worked with the GARFO staff on updating their switchboard, and we also updated the API that would go out to applications so that those lobster only vessels would get recognized as federal and be asked the correct questions. On the next slide is the regional data coordination with the Southeast Commercial Group. We meet with them every other week. They are working on the commercial and HMS logbook. These are logbooks that they do intend to make electronic at some point. At this point, they are only accepting paper. So we meet with the Southeast Fisheries Science Center, HMS, and also GARFO staff. We do have GARFO staff come to these meetings because coordination between the Northeast and Southeast on the commercial side we felt was really important. And so Lindsay has been gracious enough to attend these as well, so that we have a lot of coordination on the reporting for folks that hold permits in both regions. And we just keep a spreadsheet to track any issues that we have. And then the next one is the adaptations to allow submission of state data. As I mentioned, at this point, the Southeast is not accepting electronic reporting. They are only accepting the paper reporting. However, our system was seeing those vessels as being federally as being required to answer federal questions. And so instead of showing them Southeast questions, we were showing them a base form because the Southeast didn't have any questions turned on. However, that was overriding the state questions that would have been asked of that fisherman. And then the fisherman would be required to go report on paper for the Southeast. And so what we've done is if a vessel has only a Southeast requirement, we're having that default back to the issuing agency of their fishing permit so that the state questions are being asked. This way the state can continue to collect data until the Southeast commercial program becomes electronic and online. This also is sort of the first step toward incorporating the state requirements into the one-stop reporting effort, because that is the next phase of that effort. And so this is that first sort of step into that project as well. And so for now, at least, the states aren't losing any data, which is the important part. And that leads us to more questions.
Great, thank you, Jeff and Julie. Any questions on the regional coordination stuff? No hands around the table, any hands online? Okay. I think we can move on then. And Jeff, I assume I'm going to you for the stuff.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everybody for paying attention to all these things so far. Couple of quick announcements. Every quarter, ASMFC has an Employee of the Quarter. And for the first quarter of 2024, I just wanted to share again with you guys, I think it was already in the ASMFC Fisheries Focused newsletter, but Alex Johnson, as a recreational team lead, was awarded Employee of the Quarter, primarily for this cross-team effort to get the MRIP queries redesigned and out there. Also, we've had a staffing change for our data team lead. Mike Rinaldi left us in February, and we have a new team lead starting on May 16th. So we're excited to fill that gap. And again, appreciation to both Julie, Ed, and Joe Myers on the data team for kind of stepping up and helping to redistribute and fill in things while we have an open position for a few months here. So thank you for that. Next slide. Another update that we think was actually pretty wild. It was months in the making, but ACCSP was the focus of an Oracle Business Innovations webcast. And so this is using Apex, Oracle's Application Express tool, which is what we use for the data warehouse interface. We use it for the ATA. We use it for all the safest online electronic deal reporting, electronic trip reporting. And it's the fisheries use of Application Express driving the data collection and dissemination on the Atlantic coast of the USA. So there were over 100 people worldwide, Oracle programmers and other interested parties taking a look at what ACCSP has done as kind of an innovative approach to solving cross-agency problems in software that could be done with a relatively low code base. And so while we do have Ed and 3 other kind of classically trained software people on staff, a lot of these applications with some outside help for initial development or some internal development work are really things that we as classically trained biologists and on-the-job trained IT specialists have been able to program and maintain. And so it was actually a pretty wild audience and group of questions about how we've been able to accomplish these things and kind of that more software development access activities. So we were pretty excited about that as well. The next item is just an opportunity for you guys to ask questions or on anything that's been in the committee newsletters. So they've been coming out on a monthly basis. We've heard from the coordinating council that those updates have been useful, as well as the other committees. But an opportunity here to see if you had any questions there.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Questions for Jeff or Julie? Not seeing any around the table, any online? Okay, Mr. Fletcher, we're doing good on time, so I'm gonna go ahead and go to you. I'm just, making sure these are questions on the newsletter. So just clarifying that for you, but go ahead and open up your mic if that's what your question's on.
The question is, on these newsletters and stuff, is there some way to use artificial intelligence to get better input from the public? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Fletcher. Jeff or Julie, response?
These newsletters are identified to share with ACCSP partners and interested parties of what our activities have been in the prior month and what upcoming activities are going to occur. And so the newsletters aren't, in my understanding, the best forum to gather input, either directly through individuals or through some AI platform.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. All right, one more. Richard, go ahead.
Just a comment on that last question. There are some efforts around with different agencies to look at AI in terms of large language machine models. So machine learning. So those are efforts that use algorithms to pull pieces of text out of various types of writings, any kind of writings. Could be an article, could be a paper, anything. I think that some of the federal agencies are starting to evaluate the utility of that, because right now there are a handful of different models out there that use certain algorithms, and you have to repurpose them and so on. But there is some I would say interest in pursuing that approach, AI, to gather information specific to things like key pieces of text or whatever that might provide some input or categorize or classify input from council meetings and so on.
Great, thanks for adding that, Richard. Appreciate it. Okay, not seeing any other hands around the table. I don't think there are any online either. So why don't we move along to other business? And Jeff, feel free to take it away.
Great, thank you, Madeline. Next slide. Perfect. Recreational Technical Committee has talked about this. We did put it at the end as a quick discussion item, but there's looking forward the potential for expanding MRIP data collection in unsampled months. And so just to kind of reframe folks that may not be as familiar with MRIP, the historically kind of unsampled months in the Atlantic, wave 1, January, February, would be Georgia, South Carolina, and then Virginia all the way through Maine. So right now, North Carolina is the one state that does participate in wave 1 sampling on the Atlantic coast. Also waves 2, which is March, April, and wave 6, November, December, are not sampled very much in Massachusetts or at all in New Hampshire and Maine at the moment. So why would this potential expansion be considered at this time? Well, there's number one, the Atlantic Recreational Data Collection Implementation Plan does call for periodic effort sampling to evaluate shifts in fisheries or fishing effort due to climate change. And we've seen fisheries and timelines of fisheries moving over the years, but right now there's not a lot of data during that those unsampled months to evaluate what really is going on in a similar methodology as the rest of the year. As mentioned earlier, the MRIP state conduct has been going, in our belief, quite well, and that provides a good structure and opportunity for expanding some of these things as they come online and they're possible. What really brought this to the focus was South Carolina came up and said, hey, we'd really like to do wave 1 sampling for 2025. Can we do it? And we've had a bunch of discussions with South Carolina, with MRIP, and the good news there is, yep, I think the ACCSP and MRIP can help create those draws, specifically for for-hire telephone survey and for APIS, the dockside intercept portions. The next slide will get into some more details for that. And in addition to this, talked about the consultant's review of the for-hire logbook methodology. One of the gaps there was, what if there's logbooks in wave one from a for-hire fishery, charter boat or headboat captain, but there's no APIS there to balance out the calculation methodology proposed. Good point. Maybe we should look at that. So the opportunity to do APIS sampling in wave one might also be an opportunity or driver to look at. Next slide. Of course, we say sampling and unsampled data collection in unsampled months. There's really three components to that, and they're kind of listed in bold on the slide here. So the easiest one is the for-hire telephone survey. And I say easiest because it's possible with existing staff and available funds to do a draw and make some more phone calls for the for-hire sector with the existing methodology. There's potential for South Carolina to do this in 2025 and also kind of expand that to other regional coverage. So if there are other states that would want to participate in the for-hire telephone survey calls in wave one to kind of expand that, Georgia through North Carolina, potentially through the mid-Atlantic, please let us know, and let us know soon, meaning in the next month or two, if you want to be consider that particular approach. If the fisheries in your state and your staff, we can work out kind of the details of that. The second zone of this would be APIS dockside intercepts, and so with APIS, that's a lot more staffing. You got to drive out to a site and stand there for 6 hours. And that takes increased staffing and also increased funding. And so one of the things that was identified in the last two Atlantic implementation plans, 2016 and 2021, was developing some criteria based on the level of effort of when APIS dockside sampling would be appropriate based on how much effort is being seen. So MRIP has done some work in the past about how much effort occurs in wave 2 and wave 6, how much the economies of scale work for efficiency of dockside data collection. There's a bunch more work to be done there, but the idea would be to figure out at what level of effort sampling would adding in the dockside APIS sampling be appropriate. That's an effort that's going to take probably the rest of this year to figure out. There's opportunities for you as a coordinating council to talk to us about that, both as a committee, as a council in the room together, as well as over email and communication with staff. So with that one, there's a bit less of a time pressure, but if you're interested in doing that, please talk to staff about it. And then the third one is the fishing effort survey for private anglers. That's probably the more difficult one in terms of timing and scoping, because that's not part of the state conduct agreement with MRIP. That's a separate approach. And of course, there's a pilot study occurring in calendar year 2024. So with consulting with MRIP and thinking about it with the states and Rec Tech Committee, the change in methodologies, the FES pilot study, and when kind of that contract or other things would be able to come in line, and which states and range would be appropriate on what timelines. The short answer for today is really there's potential for 2026 fishing effort survey in wave 1, but it's going to need some additional work to scope out what are the requests and requirements for that effort sampling for the private anglers. And so we, again, have some time to figure that out. And so wanted to at least raise these points to you guys, think about for-hire telephone survey and APIS sampling coming up, and give you an opportunity for some feedback. We raised it at Rec Tech, and of course, some folks were trying to figure out what that workload, budget, and other things might mean to them. So with that, questions on?
Great, thanks, Jeff. So as Jeff mentioned, that's sort of a heads up, a request. If you have interest, to reach out to Jeff to discuss further. Excuse me. I think if anybody has anything quick they want to ask, we can do that. I don't know that Jeff can get in too much detail, but Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind Jeff and Julie that I want to say circa 2010, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia actually through RecTech put in a proposal to have wave one sampling, and we conducted wave one sampling for a year or two, and our results were pretty poor because it was really cold winters. But potentially there's room to look at what might have changed between then and now as a place to start to consider whether or not we would want to participate or need additional sampling.
Thank you very much. Okay, just a okay sign from Jeff on that one. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Any hands online? No hands online. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Thanks to Julie, Jeff, and Ed for the very detailed presentation. Good questions from you all. Thank you for those. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Dan McKiernan. Is there a second? No second. Oh, okay. Renee seconds motion to adjourn. Any objections to the motion? Seeing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.